Hey everybody, it's Torrance with Swordguy Builds. Today I want to talk about something I have a lot of theories on, and that is the swing belly of a stock whip. So I made a video a few years ago where I made a nylon stock whip where the swing in the belly was affected with a short run of BBs. If you have not seen that video, there's a link to it in the description, but I'll go into more detail in this video. So to start with, what is a swing belly? That is the part of the thong that swells before it tapers down. So it starts thin, gets fatter, and then it goes into the body of the taper. So you may already know that stock whips generally have a very thin thong. Now, in order to get that to crack, you're going to need to get your leverage in other ways. One of the ways we get that leverage is from a longer handle, but that can really only do so much. So you have to start thinking, what are some other ways that I can make a thin thong still roll out very powerfully? And I have some diagrams here that will help me illustrate what I'm talking about. So if we imagine we have a theoretical, very thin thong, let's call it 5 feet, it has a very slow taper, and it's going to roll out very slowly. It will probably crack reasonably softly. So what can we do to make that whip roll out more quickly and crack more powerfully? To start with, we could make it fatter. You may hear stock whips that start fat and taper down immediately referred to as a bull neck stock whip, but these are kind of rare. Is there an absolute drawback to having a bull neck stock whip? Not really, and I have used bull neck stock whips that I liked, but there are other variables. Now, another thing we can do is make the thong fatter from a few inches out. That will hasten the taper, but it also shifts the balance further out into the thong. And I have other thoughts on this, but we'll get to that in a moment. Another form that we see in stock whips, mainly nylon stock whips, thanks to Adam Winrich's contribution of his 10-plat stock whip thong, is where the whip does start tapering from several inches out, but the first few inches of the thong neither swell nor taper. I feel there must be certain perceptible differences between a stock whip thong that stays straight before it tapers and a stock whip thong with a swing in the belly, but it does become very difficult to hone in on what those differences would be. So then why did modern stock whips evolve in this direction? That's something that I don't really know for certain, but one possibility is that a swing belly stock whip, by comparison to a bull neck stock whip, would take marginally less rawhide. That being said, with the explosion of sport whip cracking in the past few decades, it's possible everybody agrees that the swing belly performs better in a really vague way, but obviously you never really hear people talking about why. So then, when we're talking about the handling of the whips, what is different? How big a difference does it make? So that being said, what are the perceptible differences in handling between a whip that does swell and a whip that does not swell? Well, that's the sort of thing that we do have to have a certain level of mastery in whip cracking, specifically with different types of stock whips, before we can hone in on the nuance in weight distribution and how that affects the throws. I do feel that a swing belly stock whip will flick a little easier than a stock whip that does not swell. That being said, it does come down to differential braiding tension and the specifics of the weight distribution, the rate of taper, etc. Now, I have right here my stock whip from Peter Thorndike that I won a few years ago. This one swells from about 11.5 millimeters to about 14 millimeters. Now, I also have the California whip. I wasn't necessarily trying to match this one to my Thorndike, but let's see, this one swells from about 12 millimeters to about 15 millimeters. So mine is a little fatter than Peter Thorndike's, but it's also 8 foot by comparison to 5 foot. So I might make that choice the same in the future, or I might even make it fatter. So then if you are trying to make a swing belly stock whip, what can go wrong? Well, I would say that if it doesn't swell enough, that whip will still feel very floaty. On the other hand, if you swell too much, that whip is probably going to feel very clunky and heavy. That being said, it will also come down to the length of the swell. Generally, it will happen over roughly 9 inches. Somewhere around there is where the focus of weight is going to be. I believe Peter Thorndike told me he aims to swell for 6 inches, then hold for 6 inches, and then continue the taper down. Paul Nolan has told me, taper up to about 9 inches and then taper down, which obviously gets you almost that same geometry. So if it's so difficult to do and there are so many ways it can be messed up, and we're not even sure why it works the way it does, then why do it? Why do it? Well, what I always come back to is if you can nail those proportions, and if you have your differential braiding tension really honed in very nice, in a way that's very difficult to describe, it does make most moves kind of easier. Because you have a certain amount of weight focused away from the highest point of flex, which is the keeper, that means there is a part of the whip that is constantly pulling itself. The momentum generated at the swell is greater than the momentum of the first thin part of the braiding right off the keeper. That means that part still wants to move even after you have cracked it, and that helps with volleys or four corners or whatever you're doing. My final suggestion is whether you think you'll like it or you think you'll hate it, just experiment with it. There's no way you're not going to learn something, and maybe you'll be able to tell me what you figure out. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was informative. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye.